All right, we're recording.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. I do apologize. It's a little loud here in my background for some reason right now. My neighbor seems to be really loud. Tonight we are learning about carnivore diet by the looks of it, which is super exciting. We have a man who has come back from recovering from yet another surgery. And the man of the hour teaches, trains, and lectures doctors all over the world, taught well over 10,000 seminar hours on 6 different continents, and he has just completed relicensing yet again. This man never stops learning, so he can keep teaching us. Clinical practice for over 3 decades, family man and mentor, the incredible Dr. Bob Rakowski.
Well, Carol, thank you always. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And, I actually got this idea as I was going through my license renewal because I was actually looking at the updated dietary guidelines. And I actually thought that they would catch up.
Zoom again, I'll show you.
Somebody there. Who do
The
we?
writing is too small.
Hang on there.
Writing like well, not now. I'll leave this.
Claudio, I think that was you, my friend.
I think it's Everton. I got him.
You got him. Well done. Well done. All right. So I got the idea for giving this carnivore presentation while I was doing my license renewal because they were talking about updated dietary guidelines, but reality is they hadn't improved them very much. So part of the conversation about the updated dietary guidelines are how are they actually determining them and what's the evidence behind them? And very, very simply, it's mostly politics, and the evidence for our diets are absolutely terrible. So it reminds me of listening to Brett Weinstein, who's an absolute brainiac. I mean, this guy has a brain like Einstein. He was testifying under oath before Congress. And he was asked the question, can we rely on the National Institutes of Health to keep us safe? And he said, absolutely, as long as you know to do the exact opposite of what they tell you to do. And this was under oath from one of the smartest guys on the planet. Now, carnivore certainly works for some people. Some people are really on the bandwagon. I certainly think it has value. I'm going to put my bias up front. We are omnivores. Structure determines function. I'll show the data on what our gut actually looks like compared to a carnivore versus an herbivore, and that makes us we're a hybrid. So we are omnivores. But in this, I pulled this picture of Jordan Peterson, Mikhaila Peterson, whoever was interviewing Jordan Peterson, and they're both pretty amazing stories. Mikhaila Peterson, at a very young age, maybe 3-4 years old, was diagnosed with very aggressive form of juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. She had completely destroyed a couple joints and had them replaced by her teens. She had, I think Jordan Peterson said something like 38 other joints affected, was always in pain. She had other issues going on, like very significant clinical depression. I think if I were always sick and in pain, that probably wouldn't make me the happiest guy on the planet. Interesting enough, Jordan Peterson had his own health issues, and including some mental health issues, even though he's an absolute brainiac. Sometimes we think when people are smart, everything must be working great inside their body, but it really wasn't. He was really struggling, and maybe that struggle was to teach him something, and he certainly has learned a lot of things. But here's the bottom line. Mikhaila Peterson was told, okay, why don't you try an elimination diet? And she said, look, I've tried every elimination diet under the sun. And they said, no, that's not even possible. Why don't you just try red meat, salt, and water? And the guy said, why would I do that? He says, because you hadn't done that yet. Try it. And in just a matter of days, her severe pain started to reduce. And I think she said she was pretty much pain-free after 2 weeks. And she thought, okay, let me see what else I can eat. And it didn't matter what else she brought into the picture. It flared up her symptoms, things that would always be considered almost universally healthy. And I guess that just goes to prove that nothing is great for everybody. And I'll even say, even including red meat is not great for everybody, but it seems to be a pretty safe, wonderful food. But bottom line is we're going to talk about carnivore, the science behind it, and then some of the dietary guidelines. So this was a study that occurred with Harvard in 2021, a little over 2,000 participants. So it's not a small study. It's not a big study, but big enough to draw some conclusions. And I'm pretty impressed that they were able to do carnivore for 6 months. My longest stint of carnivore was 4 days. And then I said, okay, I need to eat something green. Now I feel, blessed and grateful that I don't have food challenges. I really don't have any health challenges besides, you know, Carol and I were talking 12 shoulder surgeries. Those are all my fault. I overdid athletics, and I think I learned to listen to my body, but I hadn't done that yet. But that's my story. But anyways, in terms of overall health, well, all my markers say I'm pretty doggone good. But look at the response from this. So, of all the participants in the study, and they actually estimate that, almost 40% of people now are pre-diabetic or diabetic. That's a big number. So 100% of diabetics were able to come off of their injectable medications. 92% completely off of insulin, which is absolutely amazing. 84% off of oral medications. C-reactive protein is an inflammatory marker that's very significantly associated with pain, fatigue, cardiovascular disease, chronic disease, and it decreased significantly. I wish I had a number. Maybe I can pull up the article and look at that. And then notice this 90% improvement in all diseases. That seems like that could be a worthwhile clinical trial. So if you're suffering with anything, I'm going to suggest give this a shot. My parents are 83 years old. I've now have them doing about 2 days a week of carnivore, and they're both pretty happy about that. At 83, you'll take any gains you can get. They both have sound mind, sound body, but they have a few issues at 83. They're slowing down a little bit. So I'm hoping that this keeps them around better longer. When we start looking at diabetes, the most expensive chronic illness, I will say in the world, not just in the US, but $415 billion a year. And if carnivore is that good for diabetes, maybe we all ought to do a few days a week of red meat, salt, and water. As you start to expand this, carnivore is just an extreme of something called a ketogenic diet, meaning you're not getting anything that raises blood sugar much at all. You can have some plants. They call them low glycemic index foods, but these are the proven benefits of ketogenic. Weight loss, definitely there. Appetite control, there. And in fact, what happens when you start eating sugar, you light up your reward centers, and it's more addictive than cocaine. We've talked about that at other seminars. And, once you get off of that, you suddenly realize that, man, I might be feeding my addiction more than my body. But when you go keto, you're not feeding that addiction. Energy is certainly more stable. Blood sugar drops. Insulin levels get better. That means your pancreas is going to be better longer. And diabetes is a real bad animal. More fat burning, better brain function. It says cleaner energy production. I want you to think about that for a moment. Do carbs burn a little bit dirty in the body? And the answer is they can, especially when it comes to creating acid. So you actually will burn sugar in the absence of oxygen making lactic acid, which is a pretty toxic waste product. And that's why it shuts down the intensity of the exercise. Overall, total decrease in whole body inflammatory process. Notice it says therapeutic potential for certain cancers. I'm going to suggest that every cancer is going to be better for you doing a ketogenic diet because cancer eats sugar, but some cancers are more aggressive and harder to beat even on a perfect diet. And then notice it says glycogen enhancement, better ability to store the energy from carbohydrates. And keep in mind, there's no human requirement for carbohydrate. Think about the Inuit Eskimos, right? They're not eating anything green or any plants. They're basically living on whale blubber. But this was the cover photo for Michaela Peterson's TEDx talk that, by the way, they wouldn't post, which I find very, very interesting. It probably goes in the against the interests of people that are spending a lot of money keeping people sick. I'll just put it that way. I remember reading a book one time called The 100-Year Lie, subtitle, How Food and Medicine Are Destroying Our Health. And basically they said, we've been sold the bill of what we should eat, but if we actually look at those guidelines, we're sicker than ever. And I'll show some of the data about chronic disease increase as it's related to genetically modified food. But basically, that was a picture of her years ago, right away when she was starting carnivore, certainly feeling a whole lot better at that point in time. Rheumatoid arthritis is in a category of disease known as autoimmune disease, which is a horrific scourge in our modern world. It just, it's gone up exponentially over the last many, many decades. Microbiome, the bugs in our gut. Here's what I tell people, every living organism eats, drinks, and goes to the bathroom. We have more bugs in our gut than we have cells in our body. The difference between good bugs and bad is what they eat and what they poop. Well, it turns out that there's a huge connection between these bugs and autoimmune disease. And the diet that tends to feed the bad bugs that increase autoimmunity happen to be vegan diets. So here's a PubMed right here. Interaction of the microbiome and the immune system have been shown to promote chronic inflammatory process and autoimmunity. Sorry for just the words. I had pulled this one down, even though it's a 2013 study. I just wanted to make sure I had all my ducks in a row for this conversation. But I'll explain why this is significant on the next slide. But it says the animal-based diet increased the abundance of bile-tolerant organisms. We don't have no bugs in our gut after we stop eating plants, but we suddenly increase something called Bacteroides, and we decrease something else called firmicutes. Now, here's what we've been talking about a few other episodes. We talked about something called the obese microbiome. And the more firmicutes you have and the less Bacteroides you have, the greater the probability that you are obese, inflamed, and suffer from chronic illness. So we want to really create a better balance of those bugs in our gut. This is a medical doctor, Sean Baker. He literally wrote the book, The Carnivore Diet. Brendan Coates is an amazing connector. He read the book. He gave Sean Baker a really good review, and actually was on a semi-private Zoom with Sean Baker, Brendan Coates, and a handful of others. I was honored to be there. It was just, getting to someone that's really put his time, money, and effort into studying something. He's lived the carnivore diet now, I believe, for over a decade. And he's convinced that it's really a diet that we should all at least try. And he might even be more vocal than that. He thinks we all ought to do it. So some of the arguments for carnivore, when you start looking at carnivores, their teeth certainly look different than the herbivores' teeth. And then look at our teeth. Ours is basically a combination. We do have some things for, tearing meat and things like that, but we also have molars for grinding plants, getting the nutrients that's embedded within the fiber of the plant. When we start looking at the digestive tract, carnivore has a relatively short, small intestine. The colon, by the way, in the carnivore is a little shorter than the human colon as well. We have a longer small intestine, but certainly the herbivore has the longest small intestines. And if you think about like ruminants, like cows, 5 different stomachs, and it's not pleasant to think about this. I don't think the cows mind. They eat something, they swallow it, they vomit it back up, and they chew it again. They swallow it, they vomit it back up, and they do that all day long. Why? Because plants are really hard to get the nutrition out of. It's buried within the fiber. So they have to really, really, really mechanically break down their food to get the nutrients. Joe Rogan did a carnivore diet for a month, and pretty good before and after. I'm becoming a bigger fan of Joe Rogan. He's a smart guy. I've been listening to some of his podcasts lately. He interviews some really brilliant people, and I have to say, he asks some great questions, some fair questions, and he seems to be a good overall human. But lost 13 pounds of fat, not a bad deal. In that diet that was 6 months long, they lost an average of 20 pounds. It didn't say what they lost, but probably fat. He also, by the way, did take some supplements as well. So this was one of the webinars that I was doing for my license renewal, and we were talking about the dietary guidelines. And interestingly enough, when they were telling people to eat less meat, less red meat, what I highlighted on the right of the screen was the evidence for their recommendations was very low or basically almost non-existent. So you start looking at that and going, okay, why did they come up with this? Well, I guess maybe the people that were making the plants and the herbicides and the insecticides, fungicides, GMO organisms, they had more money going to Congress than the cattle ranchers had. So why do plants get a bad rap? There are things within plants called anti-nutrients. And one thing I learned about anti-nutrients is it's basically the defense of the plant. You know, if you eat something that makes you sick, you probably don't eat it. Now, in digging into that deeper, if you look at giraffes eating leaves in Africa, they'll eat, and they're big enough, hungry enough that they could really strip every single leaf off of nearly every single tree, but suddenly they stop eating. And what they found is that the plants say we've had enough. They release a very toxic, bitter chemical. And not just the tree that's being eaten by the giraffe at the moment, but every tree in the area. And then the giraffes just stop and they go somewhere else where that hasn't happened yet. So pretty fascinating defense system and pretty also fascinating communication system between, the plants protecting their own tribes, so to speak. So we start looking at some of these plant compounds that, definitely for some people have challenges. Lectins, definitely gut issues. Oxalates, that can be more of a kidney stone type issue. Phytates can block the absorption of certain nutrients. Goitrogens, by the way, when you start looking at goitrogens, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, kale, it's suggested that these can cause thyroid problems because they can inhibit iodine uptake. I say eat all of these, but be smart enough to take some iodine. These are generally very, very good plants. Phytoestrogens, I'm going to disagree with the PubMed where it says increased risk of estrogen-sensitive cancers. Turns out that the cultures that eat the highest quality and the highest quantity first, followed by quality, of these phytoestrogen products have the lowest incidence of cancer. These are actually what are called selective estrogen receptor modulators, and they can protect the body from more toxic estrogens. And then tannins, by the way, in coffee and tea can have an impact on iron absorption. But it is ancient wisdom, going back to sometime BC from Lucretius, one man's food is another man's poison. But as I show this Newsweek cover story, kids and the growing food allergy threat, not just food allergy, but airborne allergy. And Robert F. Kennedy has been a very good spokesperson in the US. And, he's saying, show me the data. And the data is very, very clear. There's about 30 very good studies showing vaccinated versus non-vaccinated, and they all draw the same conclusion. The non-vaccinated population is much, much, much healthier on every measure, especially when it comes to allergies. The vaccinated had 30x the number of allergies. So I think in the future, we're going to get some better research that shows what are these good for, who should take them, where is the risk-benefit analysis, and then people can make a legitimate, informed choice. The Blue Zones, this is a great book. They studied areas of the world where people consistently lived over 100 years at a much higher rate than the rest of the world. And some of the things that the Blue Zones had in common were more of a plant-based diet. And even in Loma Linda, California, these people that lived to be over 100 were all vegetarian. So very, very, very extreme plant slant on that. This was a group called truthout.org, and they showed very extreme data. I'm going to encourage you, if you're interested in this topic, just put that in your Google search. Dramatic correlation shown between GMOs, genetically modified organisms, genetically modified foods, and 22 different diseases. And they show on the left how much of these genetically engineered products have gone up. And then on the right, I just pulled out one of the 22, but they basically all look very much the same. Whether we're talking Alzheimer's, autism, cancer, diabetes, this one is for obesity. You start looking and realize something happened at some point in time that caused a dramatic increase in illness. And I think it was decreased food quality, and genetic modification, certainly one very, very big factor. So if I were to summarize my food recommendations, you've heard me say it before, Jack LaLanne said, if God made it, it's okay. If man made it, stay away. Michael Pollan said, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. I'm going to blend that and a few more. Eat real food, clean food, that means non-GMO, You know, if God made it, it's okay. Man made it, stay away. Man made the genetically modified stuff. Not too much. Why? Calorie restriction improves longevity. Not too often. Intermittent fasting helps your body rid itself. It feeds on itself. And then what cells does it eat first? The dead and dying. Every color, I believe that every color has value for long-term health. I don't know that I've seen 100-year-old carnivore, but we certainly do have 100-year-old vegans in a way that honors your physiology, your genetics, and your body goals, mostly plants. Interesting enough, I was on Eric Worre's podcast, and he stopped me right there. He says, wait a minute, mostly plants? I said, yeah, mostly plants. You look at our digestive tract from the beginning to the end, we are a blend. We are not carnivores. We are not herbivores. We are omnivores. So with that said, any questions I'll be happy to take. And by the way, Zoom changed. So I don't know if any of you had challenges getting in. Carol and I both did because our screens were very, very different. But I somehow can't stream this live on Facebook. So it's just us for the moment. Any questions from anybody? Any topic?
Okay, Claudio, it's nice to see you. I'm sure you have one.
I do actually. You know what? What a great topic actually. I love it because I rotate. I've lost my 60 pounds doing the carnivore, paleo, keto, and I've been changing it up. And that's what's I haven't got bored of the way of eating because I've had varieties of way of eating as well. And I'll do carnivore 2, 3, 4 days sometimes, and that's where I see I guess because of my genetics, that's where I see my greatest weight loss. But it's been phenomenal. It's been a phenomenal ride. But great topic. But I do have a question. So apparently, I seem to stop breathing at nighttime for certain seconds or however long I do. Is that normal, or I'm just trying to save energy? I was trying to save oxygen for the rest of the world.
It's not ideal. We want to figure out what's going on with that. You know, interestingly enough, that's a neurologic center. When you start looking at sleep apnea, I'm glad you lost the 60 pounds because the most common cause is actually excess weight, which can actually, you know, close in on the airway. So I don't know if that means you have a few more to lose. It probably wouldn't hurt to, you know, in this part of the world, we talk about you want to lose 10 more. Well, we'll see what happens with that because sometimes 10 pounds is enough. But, you know, I've got an Aura ring and I've been wearing it, who knows, 4 or 5 years now. Carol's got one. I'm glad it's not on that middle finger. Thank you. Some of you might want to give me that salute. I don't know. But Pete Cohen, you know, I love Pete Cohen with all my heart. You know, after he just had a rough 5 years, he lost his dad, he lost his mom, he lost his beautiful wife. And he was doing what a lot of us do. He was self-medicating with sugar. And finally he measured his blood sugar and he was, you know, right on the cutting edge of diabetes. And, you know, he's a fitness fanatic. And even in spite, if he wasn't training, he probably would have been 30, 40 pounds over fat and full-blown diabetic. But now there's a ring that is a continuous blood glucose monitor. So I ordered mine today because Pete sent me that link. So pretty cool stuff. That technology, wearables are coming up. Now, what's the downside of that? We're being tracked everywhere. They know how fast our heart is beating. They know we're breathing. You know, I mean, for crying out loud. But what are we going to do? It's the current world we live in. I don't know how to completely get away from that stuff. I'm not going off the grid. I kind of like the modern conveniences, but somehow, some way, we all have to honor each other and our privacy. And who knows? You know, I'll say something, and next thing you know, there's an ad coming up on my phone for what I just said. So we are being monitored to some level.
Careful what you think about.
Oh, careful. Yeah. What you think about. Yeah. So actually Elon Musk, I listened to, he's an absolute genius. Now he's so outside of the box, but he was talking about problems with phones. And they said, well, Elon, if you were going to make a phone, what would you do? He says, I wouldn't make a phone. I just connect it with Neuralink. In other words, a brain chip where, you know, I just go, hey, Claudio, you available? And you go, yeah, what's going on? You know,
It's coming. It's
it might
scary.
be. It might be.
Scary. Thank you, though. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Ray, do you have any questions tonight?
I don't have a question at the moment, but I just want to talk to Claudia there, you know. I lost my 30 plus pounds starting with OGX.
Yeah. Yeah, I would certainly love to get that. That, you know, that again, that was almost carnivore. It was high quality whey protein. If you're going to do a plant, why not do a superfood like Ganoderma lucidum in that? And, you know, we start looking at how many people lost weight on that. I think the highest I was aware of was 160 pounds. Um, and what had happened was the supply chain disruption, which I don't think was accidental. You know, the price of whey protein went through the roof, and it no longer made it a viable product. When you're using high quality whey and all of a sudden it goes up 5x, you have to make the choice. It was whatever it was per bag. Are people willing to pay 500% more? You know, and you know, I will say that business first purpose is to add value, but you don't stay in business if you don't make a profit. And if you have products that are losing money, you're in trouble. So, you know, we're blessed to have great leadership that understands business, but I would love to see OGX back. Now, I know they're working on a different type of replacement. If it's half as good, it'll be a blockbuster.
Perfect. So on that topic, I know some places tell you to use a pea protein because it's easier to digest than whey. Can you explain why one would be better than the other, or?
Well, I'm not entirely sure that that's true for everybody. It would be true for some people. When you start looking at plant-based proteins, there's drawbacks to plant-based proteins, and they don't have the blend of amino acids that are optimal to create human tissue. Now, if you're good at combining your foods, you know, and that's the rice and beans things where those cultures had to eat that, they probably figured out that they needed to do those to suddenly get a complete protein. When you start looking at whey protein, it is 60% the protein content of mother's milk. And then you start looking at that and going, okay, it sounds like we're intended to have this. Now, with that said, human whey is different than cow whey, different than goat whey, different than killer milk whey. So which whey are we talking about? Human whey would probably be almost universally fabulous to digest. I happen to think if children are having problems nursing, it's likely something that mom's eating that's being passed in the breast milk that baby's getting. Because, you know, whatever you put in is that's what's going to make that milk. So I put moms on a very restricted diet, and their colicky babies get better fast. And then we start adding back foods one by one. And, you know, sometimes it's garlic, sometimes it's grains, sometimes it's sugar. I don't ever recall a mom saying that their baby was fussy after they ate a certain meat, unless, of course, it was seasoned with garlic. And then we you know, wore that, you know, figured that out. So, by the way, if you plan on having a baby, one, congratulations. You know, you have to be healthy to have a baby because sick animals don't reproduce. But two, understand, you know, you're going to be all in with that baby, and it's harder to raise in this tougher world. So I'm going to encourage you to be as healthy as possible. In fact, I say there's only one type of person that should have a baby, and that's a healthy person. You know, because otherwise you're giving someone a really extreme disadvantage. So let's do our best to make our world better.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions tonight? Fast call tonight. You get to go and rest. No more reps.
Carol, I'm going to have to veto you on that. I got to get some more in. I'm going to be gentle though. I'm going to be gentle. I didn't do 1,000 today, only a couple hundred. So, all right. I love you all. You're beautiful. Thanks for spending this time.
Have a safe 4th of July.
Thank you, Ray. You too. And happy yesterday, Canada Day.
Thank you.